All right, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. This is our third and final panel of today's conference. We will be discussing empowering entrepreneurs, driving integration, convergence, and innovation in Southeast Europe. So let me turn over to my friend and colleague, Ilva, to kick off this last panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think John will do the honors of moderating. I'm a speaker in the panel today, so John, please kick us off.
Okay, no, you can be the moderator. This afternoon, we're going to have a brilliant panel because we're going to talk about what I like to call where the rubber hits the road. We've been talking about the private sector all day, and so now we have people who are actually working with the private sector, and we're going to get their perspective on what it's like to deal with the private sector in this region, and how we can make things better, or how we can make things more successful, the private sector more successful. We have three other brilliant panelists who are all workers. They're not theorists, they're not policymakers, they're actually on the street trying to make things happen. So I'm not going to go through any long introductions. We have our panelists, and Eric, Bogdan, and Ilva. You can read about their histories in the bulletin. They are very impressive. And I want you to jump in and ask questions. Don't hesitate. We're going to do initial statements, and then we'll talk about what our panelists have been saying. So, Eric, you want to start?
All right. I guess, sure, I'll go through it. I thought we were going to go ladies first, but I guess not.
No, this is not a traditional.
Okay, all right. Misogyny is back in, right?
Right. This is a 21st century panel. It's not a 19th century panel.
So, thank you, Ambassador. I've never heard somebody call me impressive and brilliant before, so I'm glad you got my my mother's notes earlier today.
Yes, I did.
Try to keep things lively. It's the after lunch panel. It's the last panel of the day. So I will be making several dad jokes, which would make my daughters cringe. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about how to work with government and what can government do in order to create a successful enabling environment in the Western Balkans. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that all business is local. Every single business, like all politics, all business is local. And that whatever support a government would decide to give to a particular business or any initiative that any government decides, it has benefits and costs. And I just want to kind of highlight one particular instance of this within the Western Balkans with the example of Croatia. So years ago, Croatia decided that it wanted to be a major tourist destination. And so it invested a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort into creating the tourist infrastructure, the hotels, the facilities, the airports, in order to accept a large amount of tourists into the country. Except when they became part of the EU, there is a massive drain of talent and energy away from the country towards other opportunities within the EU. And these are individual decisions that are being made, but they have a cascading effect. So while the government decided to support this tourism infrastructure and that Croatia's a wonderful place to spend a holiday, they required lots of workers. So where do you get the workers from? Well, the workers come in from the migrant community. So the migrant community ends up working in the hospitality facilities that were created by the government funding or supported by the government funding, which dilutes the Croatian national identity and then leads to a change in politics. And so just to kind of use that example to illustrate a well-intended, relatively safe investment policy that has significant carry-on effects to both the politics and economics of the country decades down the road. I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing. I'm not casting judgment here, but just using that as an illustration of the fact that any time that government gets involved in economic decision making, other than letting the market try to decide what it wants for itself, there are benefits and costs associated with that thinking. So to that end, what in the Western Balkans do I see as my personal opinion as an observer from the U.S. see as some priorities where governments could engage without potentially causing unintended consequences, good or bad. The first and foremost being regional integration economically. And this has to be a business-led process. So businesses naturally want to do business with one another. They want to trade, they want to engage, they want to buy assets across borders. And to do that, you need a regulatory landscape that is accommodative of that investment from your neighbors. Neighbors trade with neighbors first and foremost. If you look at the United States, its biggest trading partners are its neighbors. If you look at Central Asia, its biggest trading partners are China and Russia, third neighbors, and increasingly one another. In the Western Balkans, because of the history of the region, it's a little more problematic. But I do remember CIPE having programs in the late 90s where some of the very first peace building efforts were along the lines of the private sector, and the private sector's ability to bridge barriers and bridge histories in order to turn $2 into $4 in the region. And I do think that's an opportunity. And whether this is incentivized through EU regulatory policy convergence, or holding out the membership in the EU as a carrot for additional regional integration, is a separate matter. My advice to candidate countries, Ukraine included, is to make yourself the strongest candidate possible first, regardless of the specific policy that is demanded by the EU. So you have to make yourself an attractive candidate rather than just a subservient candidate to the EU. Lastly, and an issue that's near and dear to my heart, which has taken me away from Europe and Eurasia these last few years, is the issue of economic security. So you'll hear this saw again and again if you stay around Washington. Economic security is national security. Well, I don't know how well that saw holds up under close scrutiny, but I do think that we are in a post-Washington consensus world, clearly now. The prior administration noted this. The current administration seems to be enacting policies that follow this. And the question then begs, if we're not in a Washington consensus world, WTO world, then what type of world are we in? And I think that there is ample opportunity for governments and private sector actors to engage in defining exactly what economic security policy would allow for the most free trade, the most innovation and cross-border movement of goods and of capital within the framework of the new security reality. And I think that preserving as much economic freedom within the new economic security reality should be the mission that should be laid out. So the last question they asked me to address, the organizers asked me to address, was the question around how to attract investment or attract attention here in Washington. So the Western Balkans is a complex region, relatively small populations, and really probably to the viewpoint of many in the incoming administration or the current administration. I guess it's been over 100 days, I can just call it the current administration. It would be one that is mostly Europe's responsibility. However, I don't think that serves the national interests of each of the the countries within the Western Balkans to the fullest extent. I think it's incumbent on each country within the region to look out for its own interests, and those interests would involve a bit of triangulation. If I was sitting in Belgrade or Skopje, this would be my policy, working with both EU partners and with Washington, D.C. based partners in order to get what's best for my country. And I've already probably said too much, so I will turn it back over to the ambassador.
Thank you, Eric. I'll just make a comment that everything that you described exists actually in the UAE today. They have solved the problem of political activity by simply making it impossible for expat workers to gain citizenship or stay a long time. But they depend on expatriate workers. They couldn't do what they do without expatriate workers. So there's a difference between Abu Dhabi and Dubai in the sense that in Dubai, expatriate workers are accepted as equals. In Abu Dhabi, they're not. But that's only a slight difference. So, okay, Bogdan.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me just check whether this works. Okay, so I was asked to give everyone a little bit of a framework of what needs to be done legally to incentivize innovation and entrepreneurship in the Western Balkans. And frankly, let me start maybe from a little bit of a controversial point. I think the first thing that we should do is do nothing, and I'll explain why. I'll give a really, I think it's a very topical example. So the Europeans a few years back, they adopted something that's called the EU AI Act. And I'm sure that you've followed what, for example, Vice President Vance said when he was visiting Europe, which resonated with us in the Western Balkans. Because for a region that is relatively small, less than 20 million people, that is, thanks to the unfortunate events of the 90s, now trying to leapfrog back into a developed world, we need to leverage tech, we need to leverage AI, we need to move fast, we need to innovate. For that, we don't need static legislation that will kill off innovation. And unfortunately, that's what's currently stemming from Brussels. So for us, a big chance currently is the fact that we are acceding but not still members, that we are trading but still not regulated by Brussels how to trade. Because remember, all of these jurisdictions in the Western Balkans, they still have free bilateral treaty capacity. Serbia, for example, just last year signed a direct energy treaty with the States. If it were a EU member state, that would be discussed in Brussels. In Brussels, that takes on average 3 years for who knows how long. When you are a tiny, nimble country, you can do things fast. And that's what we've seen in the region, when I can tell you what's legally happening. We've seen countries in the region competing on incentives, rolling out schemes to attract FDIs, doing amazing things from Tirana to Belgrade. I'll give you some of the stats. I mean, Belgrade is currently, the Financial Times scores Belgrade as the 5th for human capital and lifestyle globally, and 9th for cost effectiveness. Tirana is currently probably the fastest moving EU acceding country. College of Europe, the pinnacle school for European law, is opened up its new campus in Tirana. So the region is moving a lot faster than the nexus that we were supposed to be moving to. And that includes law. We see that entrepreneurship is a lot more vivid in our region, that the region is in a way Europe's last final frontier for those who like science fiction. But I think this is a reality. And the fact that we are, it seems now as a region a lot closer to the US than unfortunately to Brussels, I think it might be a big advantage for the region, even legally speaking, because the corporate codes in the region were mostly done in liaison with the US Department of Commerce and the US embassies. So when we have US investors coming into the region, for them, it's the easiest thing to explain and give them a reference frame because it's mostly modeled after the Delaware model code, which people understand. And for example, some of you, I'm sure your kids stay really along on playing Epic games. All of their products were one of the biggest centers of Epic games in the Western Balkans. Pretty much at least every third time that you go to an ATM, you're probably served by a big center of excellence that's based in the Western Balkans. Well, if you like soccer games and you play them online, again, one of the top games is developed in the Western Balkans. If we visit some of these cities, we can go through streets that are named mini Silicon Valleys because the tech industry is so booming. I mean, just one last stat, and then I'll move on. So we have an increase which is 5-fold in the last 7 years in the tech industry. This you don't have in Europe. Unfortunately, under European law, does anyone know a second AI company except the one that was acquired by Microsoft in Paris? Not really. On the other hand, I'll give you an example. Even me personally, I mean, as a lawyer in the Western Balkans, we as a firm applied for a business fellowship with Perplexity, and we were in the first 1,000 globally. There wasn't anyone from the region. There's not that many people actually from Europe, because AI is just not something that in the EU is being done. And it's impossible, very difficult, let's put it that way, if you read the European AI Act. Things are very different in our region legally. So it's also a big opportunity. It's an opportunity to leapfrog. There's a lot of entrepreneurship. There is this emerging type of a sentiment that you could see back in the 90s in Poland and Czech Republic. That's what you have now in the Balkans. You have a number of countries, nations, but also young people who want to kickstart the region. And because it's so small, it must trade. It's not a region that can, be self-sufficient. So it's completely outbound in terms of its connections. And it's very much looking towards the US. You heard the Telecom Serbia's CEO earlier this morning when he was giving his keynote. 5G is being rolled out in Serbia and the region thanks to USG, in full cooperation with USG. You don't have that with some very significant and larger EU member states. So, I think that the region is changing, and fortunately it's coming from the business side. It's coming from the entrepreneurs, from innovation, from the private sector. And, we just now need maybe policymakers to reflect that. But legally, things are very interesting. And I'll stop here.
Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for this positive tone from Eric and Bogdan. I'll try to keep up with that. Although I'm born in the Balkans, I have lived, I would say, more than half of my life in the region because I don't think I will make it to 90s. I have worked in Europe and here now in the US. And I must confess, I still haven't figured out the region. And I believe maybe because the Balkans are not just a puzzle that you somehow solve. I believe they are more a mosaic that you build piece by imperfect piece. So we at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center, we try and we believe that it's time to put entrepreneurship at the center of this mosaic. And I'll give some examples why. Due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have a momentum. There is a new reckoning momentum from the EU in giving this perspective to the Western Balkans to join the single market first, this phasing integration and the common regional market and so forth. Just for the ones who are not familiar with the region, I'm going to give a few data. The Western Balkan countries is home of to 18 million people. And again, we have large waves of people leaving the region. The combined GDP is $172 billion, which is less than 1% of the GDP of the total EU economy. The average income in the region is roughly $9,000, which is 1/5 of the EU average, or just 20% of the EU average income. So now, what I want to say is that this is not a limitation, this data that I'm giving. It's an opportunity. It's a possibility to invest. It's an ambition too. What the entrepreneurs, the businesses, the FDIs should look at the region, not just at where it is now, today, but what is the potential, where it can go. To Eric's point on the regional cooperation, luckily the European Commission came up with, very quickly they turned out things with the European Growth Plan for the region, which aims to double the economy of the Western Balkans. It's still a goal. To do that, the current economy growth rate is around 3%. So to double it, the countries need to sharply increase their growth rate to go to 7.2%. And somehow that's not impossible. As I said, we at Atlantic Councils, we really believe that entrepreneurs in the region now have started, and I'll share more about the initiative that we're about to launch as part of Europe Center. Entrepreneurs in the region are already doing what politicians, I would say, somehow have failed, or they are finding hard to collaborate among each other. Businesses are already collaborating across borders with all the challenges that brings to it. They are being innovator, building trust, and trying to have shared ventures. That is why we will be launching CIAS, which is Southeastern Europe United for Success, CIAS initiative. Basically, we aim to build a network of businesses, a future 500, that will include the brightest, the boldest, the most determined minds who will lead not only the regional growth, but also the European competitiveness in the region. So let me tell you a little bit about something basic that, again, Eric mentioned, regional economic cooperation. The Western Balkans, they don't need to be discovered. They need to be connected. So one story that really struck me was from a young startup from Skopje. They had a brilliant payment platform ready to scale across the region. And it took them 2 months to register their product certification in a neighboring country. Now, 2 months in the region, and Bogdan may know this better, it's a long time in today's digital economy.
It's forever, but that really depends on a specific jurisdiction.
On the specific and everything, and that's why this growth plan and this common regional market will help the countries to come together and act as a region, as a united region, no matter what politics is doing. And that's where business can really show leadership here. And again, as I said, by implementing the common regional market, the region could add 10% to its GDP just by working together in the region. And these are data that I have taken out of a wonderful report that I really suggest you to consult in our website in Atlantic Council, the Growth Plan report offered by 4 brilliant minds. So you have all this data there. I'm not as smart as I look now. And how we can make this happen, this 10% increase, is not just through these political high-level summits and handshakes, but it's mostly working faster through cross-boarding, limit the wait time in the borders, and also cheaper transfers and fewer barriers for the brave ones that are going to go there. I think I had some more, but what I would say to someone who, to an investor, a foreign investor who wants to go to the Western Balkans, again, I'll repeat, don't look at them what they are right now, but what they can become. Political fragility, I know, is there, but that also can be a way to navigate and find and have business lead and make some kind of positive pressure towards the politicians to finally come to terms and get together their act and work together, because you mentioned it here, Bogdan, the region is closer than Vietnam for Europe, geographically, and demographically, the region represents the younger population and the most English-speaking, the better educated, and with a lot of fire and passion to achieve great things. Bogdan mentioned Silicon Valley, and we have them from Serbia, North Macedonia. You have Mira Murati of ChatGPT, one of the founders. She is Albanian born. I mean, you have all this talent from the region who really is eager to make an impact and to have the region being presented as a potential tech hub for Europe. And now that Europe is looking to kind of decouple from China, this can be a new frontier of investments. But there are, as I said, there are challenges. It's not easy, and I remember Enrico Letta when he presented his view of the EU integration, the new EU that needs to be revised. He mentioned the problem with the railways, that the EU is not fully connected. Now, if the EU is complaining about this, I don't want you to know what's happening in the Balkans. Connecting the six countries with the railways is not even a possibility, but even infrastructure connecting with roads is not the best option. Next week, together with Atlantic Council and a group of congressional staffers, a bipartisan delegation, we're going in the region, in 4 countries in 4 days. But in one, I'm not going to mention the capital, but in one of them, we need to fly via Vienna because there are no daily flights from one capital to another. So Sasha knows this. He has been hearing this in the last 3 TNL conferences that I've been present. Connectivity is an issue. And businesses, that's the first, among the first requirements that they have up there in their list. I will close it with a closing thought. When I was younger, I used to say that in the Balkans, even the future arrives late. Now that I'm definitely older, I can say not anymore, and the momentum is here, and that the future is here, and that it has a name. The name is cooperation, collaboration. And I'm saying cooperation as my daughter and my son definitely made me say it several times until I said it right. It's cooperation, not cooperation, as I used to say. Thank you very much, Elena.
Thank you, Ilva. So I would like to pose a proposition and have each one of you react to it. Again, I'm drawing from my experience in the Gulf. Dubai has been extremely successful with its free investment zones. So successful, there's investment zone 1, investment zone 2, now investment zone 3. And this involves mainly a zone where the laws of the country are suspended. And so you can import, export freely. You don't have to have an agent. You can have 100% ownership. The only rub comes if you want to sell your goods in the UAE. You have to pass through UAE customs because it came in duty free. So just take a look and see, could that be a model for individual states in the Western Balkans? Could there be a union where there's one large duty-free zone or free investment zone somewhere that spanned different countries? But just attack that problem and find out whether it could work.
That's an easy question. Who's going to take it?
No, I'm doing legally. I
want each one of you to.
Eric, do you want to go first then, please?
So I get thrown to the wolves again. So, I think it's an interesting proposition. I think that there are some existing structures, FTZ equivalents, not quite what they have in the UAE, but I really think that at the end of the day, the quality of those FTZs or of the I won't say gimmicks, but it's kind of a game of shells here, right? Where you're moving one money from one area to another. I prefer a legal and regulatory environment domestically that would benefit broadly, rather than carving out areas for free trade or for this type of thing. They have their place maybe at the periphery, but I think that the opportunity is so great within the Western Balkans that, I mean, these things are a nice to have but not a need to have, right? I think that there's a lot higher opportunity in cross-regional collaboration, within the Western Balkans. If I'm a business, so put yourself in the perspective of a business person, and I can't even literally get from one capital city to another because of the logistics, and I can't sell my products if I use this example in Central Asia, which is also a fragmented regional economy, right? If I want to produce shoes, right, some physical good in the Western Balkans, and I have my marketing team sitting in Serbia, my production facility in North Macedonia, and I don't know, my legal and regulatory folks sitting up in Slovenia. How does that all fit within a corporation, right? Bogdan, I mean, what's the billable hours on that?
If I may, I mean, I respectfully disagree on pretty much all of it, and don't get me wrong, it's just that, first of all, businesses really do work well in the region. And okay, maybe there is a single example of a capital that are not connected by airplane. But the region is tiny, you guys. I mean, it takes a couple of hours to get from one city to another. So unlike maybe policymakers and politicians, businesses don't mind. I mean, they actually hop on that car because they're entrepreneurial. They want to make a buck. So they will take the car. They will get where they need to. And I'm not a big believer in big government. So in that sense, for us, maybe less of a government and more business in the region would solve problems. If we actually focused on making added value instead of added policies, we could have done it differently ages ago. I mean, and I need to remind you, I don't think that the Balkans is a backward region that never was a shining example of something different. We need to go back only to the 80s. I mean, what was the first McDonald's behind the Iron Curtain? It was in Belgrade. It wasn't in Warsaw. It wasn't in any of these shining cities that you have now in Central Eastern Europe. It was in the Balkans. So we already showed once that we could do something differently and be more progressive. We can do it again. And our businesses are doing it. It's the policymakers who are lagging behind, if I may.
Can I disagree with both of you? I'm joking. I cannot disagree with both of you, but I can to answer John's point. The free zones, they have been on a national level, like Albania, for instance. I can give you the example of Albania. They have been giving these areas beautiful near the beach, etc., near the coast. The problem is not just having that legislation, which is helpful and it may attract investors. The problem is the rule of law, the high corruption in the country, and the quality of the services you get from the public administration and so on. So you need to harmonize everything in order for these free zones to capitalize on real investors. Yes, Bogdan has a point. The businesses somehow they speak a different language, and I think they use a different currency from politicians when it comes to finding ways to make things work. The problem is that, as I said earlier in my speech, they should exercise more pressure towards the politicians in order to make this kind of cooperation official and make it more trustworthy for an American investor who will not understand what an Albanian and the Serbian and the North Macedonian are doing together when there are gaps in the legislation or there are fears that the administration somehow takes bribes, does not respond to the digital services and so on.
If I may, first of all, I think we really need to stop being so critical of the Balkan governments. Maybe we should also look at someone else, because, for example, back to Ambassador, your initial question, the reason why we don't have more free trade zones, unfortunately and respectfully, is not what my co-panelists said. It's Brussels, because we cannot have more free zones. Why? Because that's considered under EU law, state aid law, and that's prohibited under our association agreements. I can show you progress reports of Albania, of Serbia, of North Macedonia, where all of these free zones are listed and they're incompatible with EU law. End of quote.
Yeah, but
So,
Bogdan,
no,
last
no,
time
sorry,
I
sorry,
checked,
please.
Serbia is a EU candidate country.
All of us
Negotiating.
are. Well, no, but
So
sorry. So let
it's
me finish.
voluntarily part of the
No,
club.
of course, no. But listen, Brussels, if they want to help, you cannot only help by giving lip service to the Balkans. You actually need to do something on the ground. And we've seen the Balkans doing a lot more on its own, or the U.S. when the U.S. was more engaged with the region than Brussels. Let's be honest. I mean, if somebody was moving and doing things in the region, it was the U.S. while it was involved, and it was these countries on their own. And again, I disagree. I mentioned Epic Games. You can sit now talking about railways. In Belgrade, in an hour's time, high-speed railway, you'll be in Novi Sad where Epic Games has its HQ. Very quickly now, and that's one of the good things that the Europeans did under the growth plan, you'll have that connection all the way to the south, eventually and hopefully all the way to Greece. So, guys, things are happening and we shouldn't be only critical, and businesses are changing things. I think, for example, the free trade zones, amazing idea, but you know why it's not allowed? It's not because we're candidate countries. I respectfully disagree. It's because if you take a map, we're surrounded by the EU. You cannot physically trade a single tangible good from the Western Balkans into any third country without going through the EU, which means that our sole trade partner, the biggest one, as much as we would like to do it with the States, we need to do it with the EU. And since we're so tiny, for those of you who like trade law and policy, and were following negotiations when the UK was exiting the EU, I think everybody could see who had the leverage. It wasn't the UK. So just imagine what kind of leverage a very small region like the Western Balkans has compared to Brussels. So it's not a voluntary thing. I respectfully disagree. If I'm a fraction, and back to your numbers that you said at the beginning, if I'm this tiny, I'm 1%, economically speaking, with a trading partner who is 99%, then it's not voluntarily. And if I cannot trade with anyone, if I don't trade through you, then I need to meet your conditions, which is great, but then the conditions need to be smart. They actually need to help the region. And that's where Brussels needs to change.
So let me ask each one of you another question. Do you favor or not favor association with the EU?
May I go first?
Okay, no, we have to let Ilva go first because I'm being criticized for not letting the lady go first. So,
Bogdan, please do.
So
No,
I'm a deep and very sincere EU enthusiast. There's no other project in Europe that's more important than the EU. But but if I can quote a very lovely and smart man, and his name is Draghi, who gave a speech a month ago at the Parliament, and said, "You don't want," and then he quoted everything that the Union is not doing. Do something. That's exactly it. The EU needs to get its act together, first with itself, and then with us. I strongly believe that if the EU were different, if the EU were in the same mood that it was in the beginning of the 90s, the entire region would have already joined it.
May I?
Yes, please.
Okay. Dear Bogdan, I really disagree with you this time. Yes, Brussels has its own baggage and they need to change, and they kind of changed with the growth plan they came up. But how about we look at ourselves first, at our governments in the region? Why don't we become what Brussels is asking through the internal reforms and everything we have to do, and become ready without thinking of what will Brussels do, if they will get us in or whatever. Why don't we get together as a region first, and then get the opportunity and take the advantage to be part of the EU single market? No one is stopping us. This is not a problem that Brussels is creating for the region. This is the region not being entirely ready to take advantage of the opportunities, starting from the investments and the co-projects together among the region. And let's not talk about how fragmented the region is. Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia, security issues, all these are a concern for Brussels. we cannot ignore. We cannot say that, well, Brussels need to change. They see a different reality from what you and I see. And the other issue for Brussels is that they need to have democratically and democracies that are strong in the region. Right now, you know, your country is going through unprecedented wave of protests. Albania just had elections, and we have an opposition who is contested and who is accusing of the current political party in power that they have used the administration, like old, let's say, the old accusation for our countries for the elections. In that, these are concerns for Brussels.
Businesses?
No, from Brussels. Again, I'm going to that point, and they need to be sure that the future partners will not have this problem with their democracies. And to close my disagreement, and now I'm getting closer to you, it's what we say in Albania about being a pessimist and an optimist. An optimist is the one who thinks that Turkey will become a member of the European Union under Albanian presidency. And the opposite of the optimist, and the pessimist is the one who believes that Albania will become a member of European Union under Turkey's presidency. That is the mood in the countries. We cannot deny that.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Wait a minute, we didn't hear from Eric.
Eric, sorry.
So, I mean, on the EU, you can't change geography, right? You can't change geography. The Western Balkans exists where it does. And as you pointed out, you know, your largest trading partners are surrounding you. And so you have to deal with it in some sort of capacity, right? And again, back to national interest. It is in the national interest of the Western Balkan nations to trade with larger trading partners that have the FDI to put into Western Balkans. Where I take issue, and I think this is where I agree more generally with both of you actually, is that only the EU could come up with a competitiveness program that would require $800 billion of government financing, right? You cannot keep reaching to the regulatory policy reflex and expecting growth. You know, and so it's my hope that the EU find itself and rediscover that it actually does have business that operates in the EU, that it does actually innovate in some specific spaces, that the purpose of the EU, right, was for trade, right? And every time I hear in Brussels that single market this or single market that, I just chuckle a little bit to myself because, look, Bogdan, you probably done these deals, right? Setting up businesses between Germany and France, and right? It's not easy. It's not easy because there's different regulatory frameworks. I mean, just from a logistics perspective, you know, I know entire companies who base their business model around shifting truck drivers and cargo weights at the borders because different states within the EU have different requirements, and there's an optimization protocol, and they use so. That's within the single market of the EU. If I'm doing business between Delaware and Maryland or Delaware and Virginia, I don't have to worry about 98% of that stuff. And so that's a single market, right? The United States is a federation of states, right? At the end of the day, 50 different state regulatory policies, but we still have a common market. That is a common market. Whatever the EU has currently is not a common market. And so I wish they'd stop using that phrase.
And if I may, so I completely agree with Eric, and I really advise you all, those who haven't listened to Draghi's speech in the European Parliament, it's a must-see, because he pretty much says the exact same thing, and that was, you know, a speech that came after a very lengthy report and a fantastic report on the state of the Union.
480 pages?
Yeah, a really, really good one, with a lot of interesting assessments, and for example, what you mentioned about France and Germany and then going back to the Western Balkans, again, I respectfully, Ilva, I disagree, because if Germany and France are still so fragmented, and if the market doesn't work with them, and they've been at it for 70 years now, with a lot more skilled people than what we have in the Western Balkans, we're not so bad. I really think that we should give ourselves a chance. And again, governments should move out of the picture and let entrepreneurs, which was our topic, and innovation work. Not looking to Brussels, expecting for Brussels to solve things for us. And talking about democratic deficit, I agree with you. But listen, I mean, we have a democratic deficit for people who are keen on EU law, and that was my field originally of expertise. I mean, we've been listening about democratic deficit in Brussels for what, 4 decades? I mean, should I remind you guys, when the Lisbon Treaty was being adopted, that there was this lovely country in the Union that's called Ireland that voted on a referendum against it, and then was sent on a repeated referendum. But when the UK did the same thing, then we had to have Brexit. The democracy is a delicate thing. So I wouldn't be so judgmental of the Balkans. I mean, we can do a lot more, but it needs to be done in a different way. The way it was done so far, it doesn't work. I think that's the only thing that we all agree on.
If I may, just a final comment from me. Yes, I agree, Bogdan, that it's true that when there is big fragmentation, and Draghi really made a point on that within the EU. And as I said earlier, we are 1% of the EU total economy as the entire Western Balkans. And if I may, in our region, the small countries have big imagination. And we like to compete ourselves with Brussels, with Berlin, with Paris. But unfortunately, we are who we are. Like, we cannot ignore our reality, our geography, our history, and our problems. And I said we are only 18 million people.
Ilva, if
In
I
the
may,
end.
sorry, just one thing. We are sitting in a country that 200 years and something ago had a vivid imagination. I mean, imagination is key for entrepreneurs, and that's why the U.S. philosophy resonates so much with us in the Western Balkans.
That's fantastic. Then we should stop wanting to be part of EU.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't
No,
say
I'm
that.
joking.
Far from it.
This was part of a joke. But listen, I still want to make a point and I said it earlier. Let's do what we can within ourselves, the countries, the 6 countries. Let's forget whatever past was. Or let's try to address those issues, and let's work together towards that cooperation that I ended my speech. Because in the end, we cannot impose what we want to Brussels,
No, of course,
or even
but,
to DC
Ilva,
for
but
that
that's
matter.
that's what businesses are doing in the region. That's why I said policymakers are maybe at issue. Businesses are actually working fantastically well. So, I mean, there's no point in addressing that to them when they're already doing it. I have a bunch of clients who are covering all of the jurisdictions, who are not complaining about the hurdles, but actually finding solutions. That's why I'm saying maybe small government is also one of the things that we should explore. So maybe less policymakers and more entrepreneurs.
Okay, I have a lot of cases who are still struggling with land property in Albania and other countries in the region. But let's close it on a positive note. We are ready to cooperate. Yes?
Yes,
We are.
absolutely.
All right. So I have one last question, and then if the audience has questions, we can deal with them. There's actually, in the Congress of the United States, there is a Balkans caucus. It's small, but there still is an identifiable Balkans caucus. So I'm going to just ask each one of you, what could that caucus do that would benefit the situation in the Balkans, the economic situation that we're talking about?
Ilva, do you want to go first now?
No, you can go now.
Well, okay, from a legal perspective, what it can do, more free trade with the Western Balkans. Because, whatever, I think even the most optimistic assumptions when it comes to accession, and currently, we need to be candid. I mean, it's Montenegro and Albania who are being mentioned as the front runners. Even that will take years. So in the meantime, all of these nations are free to trade. The US is an amazing partner. Generally, when you look at wherever the US went with its trade agreements, those regions flourished. If we go back to what was done in Southeast Asia back in the day, in Western Germany back in the day, that track record of state building, of entrepreneurship, of free initiative came from the US. I would love that it came more from Brussels, and I'm advocating for it. But it didn't. It came from the U.S. Even to Brussels, it came from the U.S. Schuman was sitting down with U.S. lawyers drafting the Rome Treaty. So, but anyways, my point is, what we saw with the energy treaty between Serbia and the U.S., what we've seen, what we saw in Montenegro, in Albania. So more direct bilateral treaties, sector-specific, or even more comprehensive trade treaties. An AI treaty between the Western Balkan jurisdictions and the US, because that's where we can also work together. We have fantastic people in AI, from Albania to Serbia to Kosovo to Bosnia. Amazing people. A lot more affordable than the EU. Taxes are better. But we need direct access to the US market. So in that sense, a lot can be done. And if we make the region more attractive, then hopefully Brussels will also understand that we're not a Balkanization example, but instead something that should be sought after.
So agree wholeheartedly on AA policy and regulatory policy. I think it's a huge opportunity. It's something I think that this administration is looking for. Post-war Germany, look at make corporate diplomacy great again. U.S. businesses are some of the best diplomatic actors, when you go to any AmCham, American Chamber of Commerce in the region, it's filled with some of the brightest, hardest working, most innovative, most hungry people. And this is a real testament to the attraction of working for U.S. firms and for American companies. It's anytime you're in the room, it's usually, I would say, 70% women, because women, in the region really work their butts off to get and achieve those positions. And in societies that are a little bit more closed to those opportunities, I keep encountering women at AmCham events that are at the peak of the corporate ladder within the region. And I think that's a wonderful asset and a wonderful thing for the United States to engage with and show off. I would, if I were in the caucus in the legislature, in the House here, I would encourage, with whatever I could, seeing as how certain things have been dismantled over the last 120 days, 110 days, any kind of regional cooperation, any carrots that you could put out there through trade facilitation within the Western Balkans. Doesn't have to be with the United States and the U.S., but to start that regional integration, regional cooperation, logistics within the Western Balkans, directing DFC to support some financing of logistics and infrastructure, getting things in and out of the Western Balkans is really important. And making it easier for business. I know you're saying it's easy already, but even easier, right? I know your billable hours will go down if it's too easy.
No, Eric, please. You have a lawyer who's actually advocating for deregulation. So if I'm putting my money where my mouth is. But my point is, you're absolutely right. Back to that one. Just look at the double taxation treaties that the U.S. has with these jurisdictions. Most of them, there isn't one. And if we want to facilitate trade and U.S. businesses coming into the region, I had this discussion informally with people, and I won't mention with whom, but within USG, I was asking why there isn't DTTs with these countries, double taxation treaties. They said there's not enough interest from U.S. companies to push for it. So that can be, even that, just one little thing, and that's it looks as something big. It's actually a technicality, because DTTs with smaller partners are pretty much model agreements. If you push for it, you get these DTTs in place, there will immediately be a Kickstarter for additional trade and U.S. investment.
Why wasn't interest from the U.S. companies? Did you ask that question?
Yes, of course.
Was it, again, rule of law, institutional strength?
No.
What was it?
Well, I said I wouldn't mention it, so I'll stick to that one, but it wasn't anything negative, frankly.
Okay, that's good. No. And then what I would say to the caucus was the following, that two people from the region who disagreed most of the time in the panel agreed in the end, respectfully. I agree with Bogdan. The region can be a platform for action now, and can show to Brussels or to DC that the Balkans are capable of not being a burden to Europe, but also be a competitive asset for the future. So let's close it to this nice.
You-
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have 35 seconds for questions. Any questions?
I have one.
Yes,
And I'm
surely.
loud, so I can just project. I just wanted to ask about how brain drain, whether that's a symbiotic relationship in the area, like how that affects innovation and growth, particularly at this time in Western Balkan history. So if you could just speak a little bit more to that, I'd love to know.
You should.
Thank you.
Let me go
I'm not
first.
talking.
So I'll be very quick. It's a great question. It's an uneasy one. I think the biggest hit to the region definitely happened in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not same across the region. And it also depends on the specific field. I think the most, but listen, you see that again back to Europe. You see that also in Europe. People who want to do the highest tech and digital stuff. So I mean, we have a famous Albanian, one of the most prominent tech people from the Balkans, who was in the top 3 leaders of OpenAI. Why? Because there's no place in Europe where you could have, unfortunately, at the moment, a company like OpenAI. So that specific niche of people, I think, for them, they will be all gravitating towards the US. For others, we've also seen circular motion where you have now repats coming back into the region. And I think that the more we create with businesses opportunities for them to come back, then it's going to be different, because then they will get trained maybe in the US or Europe and come back. That's key. The key is economic prosperity, in my book at least.
Sure.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Benjamin with the National Democratic Institute, NDI. I wanted to hone in on what I might call governance. We've all spoken to the deficits of political democracy, about governments in the region being able to be out front on economic growth agendas, transformation. And I take the point about government being able to get out of the way, but government is needed on pretty fundamental things like rule of law or corporate finance or public administration and labor market. With the growth plan coming or already arrived, do you believe that governments in the region have a clear-eyed agenda, a clear-eyed policy agenda about how to maximize those resources to build the private sector? Or do you think that the governments in the region are not quite there yet in terms of being able to articulate and execute that type of policy agenda?
You want to go first, please? I'll let Chris answer. He's the one who deals with the question.
Sure, I'll start since we're NED colleagues. So, look, my parents always used to tell me, if you want to hear God laugh, make a plan. And to me, all of this government planning around labor markets, around shaping this, around is just, I mean, it's a useful exercise, I guess, in some respects, and but in other respects, I don't think that extensive planning is required. In terms of AI regulation, for example, I think it's helpful not to have government ahead of industry. I think it's at the bleeding edge of specific industries. Perhaps it's okay to kind of move out ahead and let regulatory policy catch up. And sometimes mistakes will be made. But at the end of the day, that's how you foster innovation. You're at the bleeding edge and you're pushing the envelope. If you want to see a company fail, put a lawyer in leadership. I'm a lawyer, so I can say that.
Second that.
And so the whole risk-off approach to governance, I think is not appropriate, especially in the Western Balkans. We're trying to get 7.2% GDP growth per year,
Yeah.
right, to hit that target. To get 7.2% GDP growth, even from a lower base like the Western Balkans coming from, you're going to have to take risks. And you're going to have to push the edge. And there's going to be labor infractions. And there's going to be environmental infractions. That's where the government has to step in and create the sandbox and to enforce the rules, right? But not necessarily be out in front of industry. To have mistakes being made and to have, companies investing and pushing is how you get to the real growth that is needed. And then, back to your point about to the democracy issue, democracy I don't think is delicate. I really think, was it William Russell Mead in Wall Street Journal yesterday had a great piece. Democracy is not a pussycat, it's a tiger. And you're going to elect bad people if you have democracies every once in a while. And it's up to the institutions, it's up to businesses, it's up to corporate sector to push back and envelope. This is not, it's not a race that you kind of assign a winning person at the end and you get your medal and you go home. It's an iterative process, and sometimes you make mistakes and you take 2 steps ahead, and sometimes you get knocked backwards. And so, it's not a delicate flower, and we can't treat it like a delicate flower where, if the wrong person or if a certain person stays in power beyond what is reasonably expected, is not the end of the world. You have to deal with the world as it is, and in the business sector and entrepreneurs, they have to deal with the world as it is. You can't wish it away. And so to be within this environment and to act as a change maker, and to change tomorrow to a world where there are other opportunities, there are other politicians that come forward, is commendable, right? And so we have to move forward. We can't just throw up our hands and walk away.
I have one question on that, Eric. Who's going to be the guarantor, the arbitrator of what business will do? Because that's why we have state institutions. That's why we have public institutions.
Well, you also have private institutions as well.
That's a very statist view of
Who's going to make
markets.
sure? Who's going to make sure of transparency, merit-based, and legality?
Markets. That's why we have markets. That's why, fortunately, in 1989, communism fell, because markets work a lot better. And I deeply believe in markets. But if I may, just back to your question, I mean, the growth plan that Brussels is rolling out for the Western Balkans. I mean, come on, let's go back to Draghi. They're not able to implement that plan within the union. They're having problems with doing it within the union. But we should believe that in the Western Balkans it's going to succeed. I mean, I put just a little caveat on that one. What I think would work, for example, is we have AmChams in all of these jurisdictions. True. And we have corporations, both American but also from the region, that are flocking into AmCham because it's a nice little thing to have on your suit that you're a member. But if you look at what AmCham did in some other jurisdictions, and what they did in Kosovo, which was very good, they organized an arbitration venue, an arbitration institution attached to AmCham. Why don't we advocate for one for the Western Balkans, where we would have commercial arbitration for all 6 jurisdictions, where you could choose a venue, and where you would have rule of law guarantees under AmCham, where all of the members would be encouraged to use that arbitration clause. 90% of the economy in the Western Balkans is within commercial entities, not with individuals. If you have commercial arbitration and enforcement, voila, rule of law. There are smart ways how to lift the region without big government.
I just never thought that Draghi would be mentioned as the scapegoat for the region's flaws.
He's not a scapegoat, and I would never do that to Draghi.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the Chris, Bogey, and Ilva Comedy Hour. Let's give them a big hand.